Hosted by you/holdup_holden_wait. Serious, nurses and doctors of Reddit, what's your weirdest/scariest paranormal stories that took place during work? There is probably some medical explanation for this, but still the weirdest thing I've seen as a nurse so far. We had a very robust, confused old lady on our floor. Her room was in front of the nurse's station so we could keep an eye on her, and had one of our nurse's aides as a sitter too. She was always fighting, kicking, trying to get out of bed. Very restless and agitated, as some patients I've had before can get before death. One day we were called into the room as her heart rate was going down and she lay still with her eyes open. It was 30, 20, then flatlined. We checked for a pulse and did not find any. She was a DNR, so we did not attempt resuscitation. We close her eyes, prepare to get the body bag and call the family. The sitter remains in there to start getting the body ready. Less than 10 minutes later she calls us back in. The old lady is at it again, hitting, kicking, trying to get out of the bed. She came back to life. Honestly, we found the situation hilarious, and I still have never seen any patient come back like that on their own. I think she made it out of the hospital too. I worked in a pediatric hospital and had always heard that the 4th floor right outside our oncology unit was haunted. I worked 312s normally but would pick up overtime and picked up a night shift. I was working in the NICU, which happened to also be on the 4th floor but on the opposite side. The oncology unit had a staircase that was a shortcut down to the cafeteria, which was on the 2nd floor. At about 3 a.m. I was ready to take a short break and wanted a cup of coffee from the cafeteria, so I decided to take that staircase. I walked through the automatic double doors and saw a kid skipping down the hall. I called out to him as I was afraid a little kid had snuck out of a patient room. As soon as I called out to him, he turned and in the blink of an eye totally vanished. A lot of other nurses and docs had seen the same little kid skipping in that same hallway. Of course I chalked it up to just exhaustion and didn't really think about it much after that. But you are damn sure I didn't use that hallway at night ever again. Did a rotation in a burn unit. There are tons of stories that go around, but I'll share my favorite. A pimp lit one of his prostitutes on fire, and she immediately bear hugged him, causing them to both suffer pretty severe injuries. Unfortunately, hers included an inhalation burn. They both were being treated in the same ICU but on opposite ends. Weeks later she ends up coding and passes away, and about 30 minutes later, as things start to quiet down, the guy starts screaming from his room, "Get her out. Get the goddamn bitch out of my room." I used to work in a nursing home as both a CNA and an LPN, and while nothing too crazy happened, there were definitely things that happened out of the ordinary. I remember one time after someone had died, I was cleaning up her body and the door to the room swung wide open even though it had been firmly latched. Nobody was there. It gave me the creeps. There were instances of furniture being moved, lights turning on and off by themselves, and toilets randomly flushing by themselves as well. I also remember I had one resident one night who asked me to make sure I closed the door to the closet that was at the end of her bed, and she told me that when it was open, that woman kept going in and out of it all night and it kept her awake. A ward I worked on once had a patient who was a psychic/medium as a patient. We had a bit of a laugh with her as she was on the ward for a while. She'd had a stroke which affected her mobility, and she would do readings for the staff etc. from time to time. I took it all as just a bit of fun until one evening when she pressed her nurse call buzzer and told us to go check on a patient in a side room as he was dead. We went to check and sure enough found that the gentleman had died. Later on we asked our psychic patient how she had known, and she told us she had seen him coming out of his room obviously distressed. She realized he had died and had to explain to him what had happened and help him to pass over/go to light. Now I am not a believer, but that gave me the creeps. Worked in a nursing home/long-term facility for multiple years. Personally hadn't experienced anything too crazy apart from mystery call lights, call bell system going off, no buttons lit up, no rooms lit up. System would have to be reset from the electrical room to clear it. Hearing doors close shut, toilets flushing, faucets running. These were by no means commonplace. Other staff had some more direct experiences though. Apparently in one hall a little girl would occasionally be seen walking. This had been reported by multiple staff as well as patients. A staff member was sitting out in her car during night shift when some woman who knocked on her window and quickly disappeared. The next day she was discussing this out loud with the oncoming shift when someone pulled out a picture from old files based on the description provided. Apparently, it was a match to a former patient that had passed away at least 10 years before that staff member was hired. I've worked in a small family-run nursing home for 6 years as a nurse aide. It was an orphanage before it became a nursing home. It's not gossip, the owner herself has told us. When residents get close to death they see a little girl. One of my patients, a very alert 102, He knew all our names and was very alert and oriented. He had his back turned to us and was talking and laughing in the corner. I knocked and asked him who he was talking to, and he chucked and said, "This little girl came into my room. She was scared." He died 3 days later. About 6 months later, had a subacute patient screaming about a little girl grabbing his feet and she needed to leave him alone. He died that night. She's come up over the years. It's always the same thing. They see her and then they die. Other co-workers have had the same experience. It's very unsettling. I'm a nurse. I've witnessed quite a lot with Alzheimer people. They often develop their own scenarios in their own head, often accompanied by vivid hallucinations. Once during night shift, I heard a woman scream in fear. Checking on her, she managed to climb into her wheelchair in pure panic, wanting to flee her bedroom. Asking what was wrong, she thought the building was on fire. Now what's important to mention here is, people often make claims that people are just crazy or dreaming badly or something. But this is not the case. People with hallucinations have been found to actually see, hear, smell, etc. something, when their hallucinations occur, as the same locations in the brain are stimulated as if they would get real impulses. That woman actually saw fire. She actually smelled fire. She didn't just make that up to be crazy. It's what her brain told her was happening. And she was in real panic for her life. And the same applies to when those people see someone else in their room. When they want me to guide someone out of the bedroom who isn't actually there, seemingly standing right behind me. And it makes no sense to discuss with them that no one's there. To them, someone is there. And you better do your best effort of improvising to guide that someone, even if it's no one, outside. Play along, and they'll be fine. This, to me, is the scariest thing at work. They see something you don't. Okay, I'm a nurse, but this did not happen to me, but several other nurses who worked at these units. There is a little girl who haunts the burn unit of a large military medical treatment facility in the US. She has been seen by both staff and patients. Haunts may not be the correct term, but she has been witnessed by several. Second, I used to work at the old Walter Reed Army Medical Center. In the old one that moved back in 2011, there was a VIP ward. I believe it was Ward 72. Any retired general officers would stay there, along with any higher-ups in the government, think Secretary of State and other cabinet officials. There was also a room for the First Lady and President. This ward is private, locked at all entrances and very nice. It is furnished with very high-end furniture, and a lot of it was donated by Mrs. Mamie Eisenhower, the wife of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Well, per my friend who worked there, the ghost of Mamie Eisenhower is very particular about anyone staying in her room, and if anyone did sleep in that room, she would yank off the bed sheets. My friends also said decorative pieces would randomly fall off table and fly off the walls when they were the only ones up there. Mamie would also apparently page the supervisor, who would call the ward back to a very confused nurse as to who paged them. We were on a night shift, standing/sitting around the nurse's station and talking about weird things that had happened. One of the HCAs was in a side room once doing last offices, and the lights flicked on and off twice, calls bells going off when there was no one about to press them, hearing a cough when there was no one there, etc., etc. As we were talking, there was a pause in the conversation and very clearly we heard typing from the keyboard at the doctor's desk, which was just round the corner from us. I stepped round the corner to see who it was, as usually the doctors would check in with us before sitting down, just to say hello and to see if there were any jobs needing down. So I looked round the corner after hearing the keys being tapped as if someone was typing, only to see no one there. Was very freaky, and we had to change the convo as we all felt too uncomfortable after that. I worked as a medtech at an assisted living facility. One day a resident, I'll call her Margaret, suddenly passed away, and her family left all her belongings in the room that night, including her pendant, to call the staff for help. The next night Margaret's neighbor called the staff because someone was talking in the room next door and keeping them awake. We brushed the resident off knowing that Margaret's room was empty. About an hour later Margaret's pendant started going off from her empty apartment. I was the only one willing to go turn it off, so I walked into the room and it was freezing cold in the middle of summer. The air conditioning was off. Suddenly the bathroom door slammed as I was turning off the pendant light. I locked the door and ran back to the nurse's station. We forced one of the older male staff members to go check out the entire room, and he claims the door was still locked when he got down there and no one was in there. This was an odd experience. I'm a nurse in the PACU and was on call during a big-ass snowstorm. I didn't want to drive home and risk getting called back in, so I stayed at the hospital that night on our little couch in our break room. I dozed in and out throughout the night, but I got caught in some state between wakefulness and sleep, and I fucking swear to God I felt this malevolent being in the room with me at one point. It was super dark and I just felt anger from it. Like this unbridled hatred and rage. It was so heavy it was palpable. It almost felt like it was jealous I was alive. Anyway, it came down on top of me and pretty much collapsed through me and I just heard it cry in seething anger. Then, it was gone and I was fully awake. I've had sleep paralysis from time to time, but this felt different. And I have never felt such hatred from anything I've come across in my life, real or conjured. The cliché part here is this happened around 3 a.m. This is probably going to get buried. When I was a nursing student up on an ICU floor, I was hanging antibiotics in my patient's room when I heard an audible "hey." I turn around and there is no one else in the room. Mind you, my patient was intubated and sedated, so there's no possible way it was them. It was a woman's voice as well, so I thought it was my preceptor. I go back out to the nurse's station and I asked my preceptor if that was her in the room trying to catch my attention. She told me no, and I've never seen someone's eyes get so big. Apparently the room I was in has had the most paranormal sightings and activity out of all the rooms on the unit. Sightings as in shadows sitting in the corner of the room, voices being heard and curtains being flung violently across the railings. No one ever told me about this room prior to my preceptorship, so it just added to everyone's beliefs it was haunted AF. I'm an ICU nurse. A patient's son rang the hospital at 11 p.m. on a Saturday night saying he was sure his dad was dying. His dad had had a severe stroke and was doing okay. Recovery would be difficult, but he wasn't expected to die and was pretty stable at the time. I was looking after him and he was a lot of work because he would try to get up but couldn't walk, so he'd fall in a lot. The son really wanted to come in, even though it's way past visiting hours, but you know I'll bend the rules in a good cause. I figured, what the heck, it's his Saturday night, come on in and sit with your dad. Patient died about 2 minutes before the son walked in the door. It was like a switch was turned off. He just died. The last thing he said to me was, "Am I bothering anyone?" I told him of course not, even though he had some very frustrating behavior because of the stroke. The son just started crying and screaming. I knew it. How the heck he knew? We were all a bit freaked out.